Welcome to adult class. It has been actually 4 weeks since we've had our class with me. I vacated 4 weeks ago, and then I was at Cherokee. I was asked to go fill in there for a Sunday because Drew, their minister, was out of town. And then last week was our gospel meeting, so hopefully you'll remember something about our study. It's Revelation chapter 8. It's where we are beginning. Revelation chapter 8. Let me go back just very, very briefly and just rehearse a few things to put our minds back in the position to study the book of Revelation. In chapter 6, we had the 7 seals that were open. If you remember the different colored horses and things of that sort that we read about there on that occasion. Remember, some of the saints it describes were praying, verse 10, and they cried with a loud voice, saying, "How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth?" And verse 11, "White robes were given unto every one of them, and it was said unto them that they should rest yet for a little season, until their fellow servants also and their brethren that should be killed as they were should be fulfilled." So the church is going through a terrible occasion with the persecutions of Rome particularly. And chapter 6 talks about several of those seals, but it doesn't mention the 7th seal. There were 7 seals. It only describes 6. We go into chapter 7 and we read about the 144,000, those that were sealed, and we talked about the fact that God knows His people. He hasn't forgot He hasn't forgot the Christians, and I think it was very important to them. And He showed how the 144,000 had been sealed and so on. And the idea was that God's going to protect you. It's not the end. And now we come to chapter 8, and here we find the 7th seal beginning to be revealed. And here's the way it begins. We're going to read the first 5 verses, then we'll look into the opening of the seal. Revelation chapter 8, verse 1 beginning. "And when he had opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer. And there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense, which came with the prayers of the saints, ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. And the angel took the censer, and filled it with fire of the altar, and cast it into the earth. And there were voices, thunderings, and lightnings, and an earthquake." Okay, we begin verse 1 with something unusual. "And when he had opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour." Now, when I ask some questions, I don't know that we can give a definitive answer, but what is your opinion? Why would there be silence in heaven for half an hour? He opens his seal, and there's a hush, there's a silence. For 30 minutes, half an hour, why? Well, I think that's exactly it. You know, I have read comically that said the book of Revelation proves there'd be no women in heaven, and then cite this verse, that there was silence in heaven for half an hour. Well, that's not the idea, of course. I do believe it has reference to what Bob described here. It got your attention. Here is John seeing this revelation, and this 7th seal, it was open and it was a hush. Yeah, it may be going dead white, but it's working now. But there was this silence. And that kind of silence for that time would affect you how? What's going on? Why isn't anything being spoken? Why isn't there, what's this message? How is it so tragic that it's almost like, it just takes my breath, and I hate to even talk about this.
In shock.
Pardon?
More like being in shock.
Judy, I think that's a good description.
You're wondering what's going to happen.
Yes. And I think that is the desired effect. Something personal. And I'm not saying that you have to do this, that it's just something that I do. If you've noticed, when I'm asked to lead prayer, I pause before I begin my prayer. And to me, I just think it's a matter of respect to, here we're about to lead a prayer, and, to pause and before I begin that prayer. Again, that's just something I do. I'm not suggesting you need to do that. But that was the idea. And I think perhaps Judy and Catherine had better the idea of description. The shock of this. And it was, as we're going to see in a moment, when we get down to verse 6 and on, there's a terrible description coming in judgment. Okay, there's this silence. And I think we've, in my opinion, correctly described why the silence was there, or the depiction of it. Verse 2, and I saw the 7 angels which stood before God. To them were given 7 trumpets. To another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer. And there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. Verse 4, I'm going to read some of this together because I think it's all connected. And the smoke of the incense which came out with the prayers of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. Now, incense, the burning of incense, goes back, of course, to the Old Testament period when the priest would have censers. They would burn incense. It was basically the smoke from that incense. And I'll be quite frank with you, I don't know all the particular details of how that was done. You may, and if you do, please speak up. But if you had, let's just say, we've all been around campfires. If you were to take coals or something like that, and you would have them together, if there's not an exact flame maybe, but there's smoke, what happens to that smoke? Well, it does, but where does it go? Yeah, it comes up. It rises, in essence. And here, this angel stood at the altar, a golden censer. And of course, this is a vision. Please I don't know this is to be interpreted literally. This is what John sees in this vision. But an angel has this golden censer and much incense. And verse 3 is important, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. Can you not imagine the amount of prayers being brought up to the God of heaven during this time? If you have received some tragic news that your spouse perhaps is, maybe has, whether it be, it could be heart disease, cancer, or many other things that would potentially bring them their death, what are we doing? We are praying diligently. Imagine this tragic persecution that's coming upon the church. They've been driven underground to worship. They've been persecuted in the most violent ways. Many have been killed. Many more from chapter 6 would be killed. And you can imagine how their pleas would have been constant to the God of heaven and earth. And even as it said back, and I think it was Revelation chapter 6, how long? We've been for how long are you going to let this continue? Well, does God hear those prayers? In my opinion, the first part of chapter 8 says yes. And it was a confirmation. It was a relief perhaps to them to know that God does hear me. God does know what's going on. God does know the suffering that we're going through. And yes, he cares. And I think that's what this section, when he talks about the censer, is offered with the prayers of all the saints. And verse 4, the smoke of the incense which came with the prayers of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. So does God know? Yes. Does he care? We're going to find out he does. And then this message that's going to be revealed in verse 6 and following is, it's a depiction of terrible judgment that's going to come upon Rome. And I think it would have been a relief to the early Christians to know, at least in symbolism, some of the difficulties that's going to come upon this nation that's trying to stamp us out, that's trying to destroy us. All right, verse 5, I didn't read, but let's do that now. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it into the earth. There were voices, thunderings, and lightnings, and an earthquake. As we've noted in the past, and I think we could go back to the Old Testament and we could pick out these things clearly. Thunderings, lightnings, earthquake, all depict what? Judgment. Were you going to say something else, Bob? Yeah, that is a good point, and it made me think of another passage, Bobby, when you talked about that. In 2 Thessalonians, if I can find this quickly here. 2 Thessalonians in verse 4. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 4. You don't have to turn unless you want to, but I will read it for you. So that we ourselves glory in you in the churches of God for your patience and faith in all your persecutions and tribulations that ye endure. So they were going through persecutions and tribulations here at Thessalonica. Then you drop on down to verse 6. Seeing it is a righteous thing with God to recompense tribulation to them that trouble you, and to you who are troubled rest. In other words, Christians, you rest. When the Lord Jesus shall be revealed from heaven with his mighty angels, in flaming fire, taking vengeance on them that know not God, and that obey not the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, who shall be punished with everlasting destruction from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his power. So it is, if you've heard Bobby's comment, that, listen, God knows, he cares, he understands, and judgment, retribution from God, not from man. Do we have the right to seek vengeance upon anyone? No, we don't have that right. But as Paul says, vengeance belongeth to God, he will repay. And I'm paraphrasing that passage, but you get the point. So God does care, and that's what we see here. But thunderings, lightnings, and earthquakes are almost exclusively depicted as God's judgments. And I'm talking about for a reason. You know, we may have you've heard me describe the winter of 1811, 1812, the great earthquake along the Madrid Fault down in West Tennessee, how Reelfoot Lake was formed. I'm not saying every earthquake we have today is judgment from God, but back in the Old Testament, when it depicted and described judgment coming, these were some of the terms used. And I think it was because of the destruction that these kind of things bring about. Where was it just, I don't know, a matter of weeks ago or a month ago that there was a bad earthquake? Where was that? Tom, you got your hand up.
Yeah, you know that earthquake probably prevented a great gathering of all the tribes in the south about to come to drive the white settlers out.
Well, I hadn't thought about that, Tom. But that very well may have been the case, yeah. But it was a terrible earthquake that occurred there, and with much destruction. And, oh, it bothers me, I can't remember. It wasn't long ago there was a bad earthquake.
It was in India or something.
Okay, and it was overseas, yes, but anyway, and several people were killed and this kind of thing. So I think these things are used as, you know, as the terribleness of the nature of it. That's not proper grammar or English, but you get the point. So anyway, this angel takes the censer after having all these prayers go up before God. He casts them down to the earth, and there's voices, thunderings, lightnings, and earthquake. Okay, unless there's comments about that, we'll go into when the angel begins to sound. Verse 6, and the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. And the first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of the trees was burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up. Before I read further, let's look at this. The first angel that sounded, what does it mean when he sounded? The word sounded, what's that depict? What's the idea? Yeah, in reality, he blew the trumpet. He would sound a trumpet, but it was a blast in essence, okay? And it signified something that's about to happen. So the first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood. Imagine if you were John, you're looking into this heaven, you're seeing this depiction. I guess we're kind of spoiled today. We have television, we have movies and big screens, and we can sit and kind of and watch how producers have made something. Imagine John, having never witnessed such, to have this on the screen of heaven, if you will. And here's this angel that he sounds, he blows forth this trumpet. In other words, this is something that's about to happen, and he sees fire and hail mingled with blood. That would be an ominous thing to witness here. And what happens? They were cast upon the earth, and the third part of the trees would burn up, and all green grass was burnt up. Several of these you're going to find, it affects the earth. Who lives on the earth? We humans do. And it's going to affect them tremendously. And then when we get into the next chapter, you're going to see how then men began to be destroyed. I don't know what to talk about hail. Let's describe this. Have you ever been in a bad hailstorm? When years ago, Lon Schuler and we were in West Tennessee. We'd been hunting, and it was a Sunday. That Saturday night, we went to, or maybe we stayed in a motel, but anyway, we went to visit one of his friends. He used to live down that area, and we were there before the services began that morning earlier, and there was a hailstorm that come through, and that was the worst I'd ever experienced. It was so loud in his house that if you talked to someone else, you would need to raise your voice greatly. I mean, you looked out and out a window, and it was just white. Different than snow. It didn't have that bright snow, that white effect, but it was a duller color, but it was just white. And hail was bouncing up off of the blacktop. And of course, I think Lon's, I think it was one of his mirrors were busted out, and of course dents on the vehicle and this kind of thing. But and that wasn't large hail. I've heard it be as big as a golf ball. What have you experienced? Some of you shook your head. Yeah, you've been in a hailstorm.
My son's car was completely loaded. He done away with it. He cut everything out to pieces. He had it bad. I covered him up with quilts.
Okay.
But it's more of a cut sometimes, not round, but cut.
Yeah.
But it burnt the car. He got paid for it, the insurance paid it, but he just traded it and got another one and didn't use that.
What's it do to crops? Shreds them, doesn't it? If you and trees the same way. Well, that's what was depicted here.
And it usually comes down with force,
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, go back to I don't know why I didn't think of this to the very begin with, but the plagues upon the Egyptians. You remember when God sent plagues upon the Egyptians and trying to convince Pharaoh to allow Israel to leave, it was hail. And it was said that if you go back and read the text, those servants, when they heard Moses' message to Pharaoh, they brought all their flocks and their servants in. Those who didn't believe God, didn't believe Moses anyway, his message, they left their servants and their herds and things of that sort out in the field. What happened to them? They were killed. So, this kind of thing can be severe. But regardless, here it says that it came about with followed hail, mingled with blood, cast upon the earth. Part of the trees was burned up, all the green grass was burned up. So there was fire as well. And it says that followed hail and fire. So that was the effect.
Again, going back all along, the confidence of Christians to know that these Romans, as soon as we get out of that comfort zone, God's going to be doing something and raise something thorough and sterile, something like an earthquake, hail, fire. It's going to be thorough, it's going to happen. These Romans, they're going to use their Christian Christians. Judgment comes.
And it's not just this. There's many more to come. And by the way, you brought up a phrase, Bobby, that makes me think. You were talking about the Romans. Here you've been a lap of luxury. We've been suffering. The table's going to be turned. Has any of you ever studied anything? It wasn't too long ago, a few months ago. I had an interest and found something on YouTube, and I was reading or listening to it. Do you realize how advanced the Roman Empire was at this day and time? Its height? Do you realize they had running water? They had hot baths, showers. They had built an aqueduct to come from a water source, obviously, and it come into the city. And of course, this was all, in my understanding, gravity fed, but the same results. I mean, they didn't have electricity as we have. They didn't have water heaters like we have. But, they would use gravity to their desired effect, and then they would heat the water, and, it would be for the heated pools, heated even showers, as I understand it. And again, not to the same extent or level that we might enjoy, but compared to the common person of the day, you look back at my forefathers. My mother grew up. Your parents, probably all of you are the age, but your parents grew up without running water in the house, most likely. They would have had the outhouse, and they would have. But imagine being here in Rome, first century. And so what I'm trying to get at, it was a lap of luxury that many of these people were enjoying, especially the politicians and others who were, such as the emperors, Domitian and others, who were saying, hey, you've got to worship me as a god, recognize me as a god. Christians refused to do it. And he had that kind of lap of luxury, but things are coming quickly. They're going to change, and God's reassuring the people, look, I'm in charge, I'm in control. So here was this first angel that sounded, and hail and fire mingled with blood cast upon the earth. A third part of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. Okay, verse 8. I'm sorry if I ramble so much. I'm just trying to help you picture this. And the second angel sounded, as it were a great mountain, burning with fire, was cast into the sea. And the third part of the sea became blood. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died. And a third part of the ships were destroyed. What's it do to commerce? What's it do to food? Today, if there's some type of tragedy somewhere with oil, by that I mean a refinery somewhere, and maybe it's overseas or even here in America, it's destroyed. What happens to the price of gasoline? Why? Why? Supply and demand, yeah, quantity of it. We've had all of this, it's a stable market because we have this constant flow of oil, and I'm using oil as an example, but food or whatever. The same thing with, with eggs. It wasn't, I don't know how many months ago or a year ago or whatever, it was some type of, I don't know if it was a bird flu or whatever, but, there was a problem with eggs, and all of a sudden what happens to the egg prices? Grocery store, they go up. I think they've come back down now, but you get the picture, the idea. And here, a third part of the sea was affected. It said it became as blood. Was it literally blood? I don't know that. But certainly it affected a third part of the fish that were in the sea. The ships, a third part of them were destroyed. But if I get the overall picture, the portrait that's being painted is simply the idea of things are changing. Economically, your wealthy position in life is beginning to be altered. And God is behind that. The judgment was coming upon them. Difficulties, stress would be brought upon the Romans. All right, any comments about that?
I think we can see the power of God every day in our life. You go out and see sunshine and you see rain, or you hear about tornadoes or hurricanes or whatever. It's the power of God that's there. We're going to see it every day.
In my opinion, and this is exactly, I want to stress that in my opinion, every time we see an earthquake or a tornado, is that necessarily judgment today? No. But I will say this, and what Butch described I think is very, very accurate. Are we reminded of the power of the Almighty, the world in which we live, when we see tornado come and we see, oak trees just twisted or torn apart or broke at the roots and thrown down, or buildings. We see the effects of a flood. We see the tragic things of a bad earthquake. I think it reminds us that, hey, I'm not in charge here. Man's not in control. There is, the way God created our universe for those things to happen, I think they're for a purpose. I really do. And if you disagree with that, you can speak up, but that's my view of that today. I'm not in control. Yeah, I'm reminded of that passage in the Psalms, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. That is very, very true. Connie and I, we were at the Rome Mountain Naturals Rally last night, and overall it was very, very good. We're talking about fireflies and lightning bugs. I learned so much, and anyway, I won't go into all of that. But just because we learn as science, we learn what chemically goes on in a lightning bug, or a firefly if you prefer to call it that, to produce these lights, okay? And of course the purpose of them is basically for, males finding the females during the reproduction system of things. But just because I understand how God created all these things and made them all interlink, as I said, how this firefly, how it, comes about producing the ability to create this light. Does that mean that there's not a God in heaven? Does that mean that, well, because I understand it, I can see how this happens, we have broke this down and studied it, does that somehow take away from the significance of the awe of it? What I'm trying to get at, so many people, just because we've studied this and I understand this, and well, there is no God, because I see this, and it's almost as if, how can you be so blind to think evolution is the master of this? That evolution, time and chance will count for it all. Now, how did time and chance? Millions and billions of years. You give me enough time. It's nonsense. The complexity of all the living things around us. And this woman had written a book. She'd written many books, but I'm trying to remember the exact title, and I may miss this. But one of the books was something about nature is my church. And she had a great love for nature, everything from studying lightning bugs to many, many other things. But that was her church. What did she mean by that? And I didn't get a chance to ask her, but just the title itself, what do you think that suggests? Nature is my church. Yeah, that my love, okay, is the outcome. Well, that's okay. I think it's misguided. I'll reserve my opinion on that. But I see so many people that I come in contact with who have these degrees in biology and this and that, and they're evolutionists. And I'm thinking, how could you be? And when you sit and you talk about the complexities and in amazement how this is connected to that and that happens and so on, but time and chance will account for it all. Rather, we need to just, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Okay, I don't know how you got me off on that. And I tried to blame it on you, that was me.
We're to have some fear that God
Well,
can
sure.
take over, you know?
Sure, Hebrews 10:31, it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. We ought to have a reverence of our Creator. And to me, I think Romans 1, 18 through 21 teaches us that. The invisible things from the creation of the world are clearly seen. Remember even the book of Job. And, Job said, ask the beasts of the field, they shall tell you. Talking about God's existence. Ask the birds. They'll tell you. Ask these different animals. Is there a God? Or, yeah, they'll tell you. Are they speaking verb? Do they speak English? Of course not. But by their very life, their very existence, he explains to anyone with an open mind and common sense how that is. Again, we may understand, do you know what an indigo bunting is? It's a bird that we get here locally. It's a bluish colored bird, but the feathers are, and I can't even begin to describe how that happens, but flamingos. Have I got the right one? Anyway, they're red, but you know how they get their reddish color? They're typically white. Yeah, from the things that they eat. Yeah, that's right. The food that they eat affects their plumage and the coloration of it. Well, just because I understand that. I went to school and I studied that. Well, I know how those birds are pink. Does that mean that there's still not an awe about the whole thing? Yeah, Ted?
I've spent the last school year in 7th grade science.
Ooh.
And studying the periodic table. And it does exactly the opposite to me. It makes me acutely aware that how could any of this happen without God?
That's what I'm saying.
The teacher often uses salt as an example of so many things. And you take potassium and chloride, which both separately would kill you, and they occur naturally together in nature as salt. How that happens just literally blows my mind.
Time and chance. Time and chance will account for it all.
It just couldn't. Just chance could not make salt.
There has to be a designer, an engineer of all of it.
Even
if you don't consider any of the rest of it, we need oxygen. We live off oxygen. The plants and the trees take carbon dioxide and create oxygen. How could that just happen?
It couldn't, and that is the point. And again, just the complexities of the human body. If you've ever studied it, and I'm not talking about birds and the bees part of it, but if you've ever studied human reproduction, the many things that has to happen, from the female, the egg, the sperm, and all this thing, and how the infant, once conception occurs, all the things that begins to occur, and to say all that just time and chance will account for it all, and with just many failures, chances and then failures, and then nature just changed, altered this a little bit, and lo and behold, here we are, and it happens all the time. It's foolish. Ted?
And that's a big and marvelous example, but again, back to 7th grade science, just what it takes for your body to repair a cut.
Yeah.
All the cells reproducing and all of the steps that go into producing those cells just to duplicate the DNA and all that to repair a scrape or a cut on your body. It's mind-blowing.
Oh, I know, and to think all that, I keep saying it.
And we don't even know what's going on.
Yeah,
we don't do any of it.
I don't stay awake at night saying, okay, white blood cells, get up here. We got a problem.
Can you imagine if we had to have 1/1,000,000th of the responsibility for the operation of our bodies? We'd be insane. We couldn't do it.
That'd be more insane. I'm sorry to get us off chasing this rabbit, but it's fascinating. And it just chills me that some of the people I associate with, and I don't mean associate with my best friends, I go to these things and I hear certain, and I catch certain things and I'm at awe at this, but just common sense. But it goes back. Every civilization of man, and I'm not talking about evolution, I'm talking about from, the Indian of here, or an Indian in Asia, or an Indian, back when they were uneducated, everything has worshiped something. All humanity has always worshiped something. Why? Common sense. Common sense. Even though they may not have known about the white blood cells Ted was talking about, the healing of skin, or all the intricate details of a baby forming in the womb, or we could go on and on. They may not have understood all that as we might, but they knew something is above us. Okay. I'm sorry that I got us off on that, but Lord willing, next week we'll begin at verse 10, and we'll see another angel, the third angel sounding, and what happens. Appreciate your participation and attention.